Thank you all for coming today. And welcome to the Waiari Kaitiaki Advisory Group week for Wednesday the 24th of November. Please note that the meeting will be recorded live stream. And can we turn off our mobiles or put them on silent? Thank you. Cool. Oh, Uncle. Uncle. Ko kai te tuwhira te hui kai.
You'll get my papa.
Yeah.
After the papa. I mean, you got to put my papa. E mua koe I mātua I hoa I koutou I mātua mahi katoa he mea tīmata he mea mahi. He mea whakoutu roto I akoe ki a whiwhi ai ki mātua I tōro tonu. Te mea tapaiti nei koe. Koe whakaiti o kuto mātua riki. Āmene.
Do we have any further apologies? We've received an apology from Regional Council. Reverend Fraser. Is there any more? This is a public forum now. Is there anybody that wishes to speak to the advisory group? Any changes to the order of business today? Can I, the minutes of the Waiari Kaitiaki Advisory Group meeting held on the 15th of September 2021. Are there any corrections? We're not ready beforehand.
I can't remove them.
Can I have a second vote to accept the minutes, please?
Second.
Commissioner Wilson. Amendment.
Just a matter arising in terms of the minutes. At the last week, council's appointed myself into the co-chair role for the council, and that the iwi we're going to appoint their co-chair. I think it would be useful to have some feedback on whether that happened and who the appointment of that co-chair is. Or
Yeah,
just to confirm.
Yeah, we've met about that and we've appointed Darlene is to carry on in the co-chair role.
I thought this week was to confirm that.
Yeah, I was wanting to confirm it through the minutes
Yeah.
of the previous meeting, and then we can get confirmation of that.
I'll second that. Yep. What?
Thank you.
Are there any conflicts of interest?
Yeah, do I mean put this Te Hui Parawai on there, please? I think that's for all three of us.
Te Hui Parawai, o Te Waiari, so it's the typical most of the trick.
Oh. So?
That's an advisory group, isn't it? And that's all three. Is that correct?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Co-chair here.
Just
Not long time.
So in terms of process, this recommendation on page 20 and 21 about the co-chairs in terms of reference, we've signed that off, or do we need a formal resolution on that?
Signed off.
Signed off, thank you.
Any further? We move on to business item 4.1, AD Coral.
So,
We just
Sorry?
yeah,
4.1.
4.1 and 9.1.
9.1.
Thank you. No, we've just done 9.1.
Update for 10
That was confirmation via the minutes of the matter arising for that appointment.
Yes.
Mayor Weber.
So if we've approved 9.1,
We haven't moved to 9.1, we are now.
yeah, could I move we take it as read? I'm planning to move the recommendations.
Well, sorry, up to the, up to the judges.
Do we all have it? 9.1.
I'm happy to second.
Yeah.
Any matters arising from 9.1? Any questions?
Well,
She doesn't even need to leave. No? Okay. Motion. Are we all those in favour say aye?
Aye.
All those against say aye. Thank you. Motion carried.
Just for information on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
9.2, Backland Regional Council.
Can everyone see, or do you want to angle that screen slightly more?
You can see.
essence.
Just for information.
So this is.
Morena, Steve Pickles from the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. Reuben Fraser actually, unfortunately wasn't here today, but he asked that I come along and present a bit about the work that we've been doing over the last 2 years around water shortage management in the Bay of Plenty. And it's a relatively new body of work for us because we really haven't experienced the sort of extended droughts that we've seen over the last couple of years here within Waiari. So I can run through it, you can ask questions as we go if you like, but otherwise we can leave them to the end, whichever way, Madam Chair, that you prefer to run that. I just thought I'd start off with a little bit of a definition, I suppose, just the difference between a drought and a water shortage event. And the droughts, the sort of things I suppose we're quite familiar with. It's been occurring particularly over the last couple of years, and often more, we'd expect around Hawke's Bay in those areas, and particularly in areas in the South Island and potentially up in Northland. But it's that sort of creeping phenomenon. You know what I mean? It's difficult to define. It's not really got a start and an end point. It kind of happens, and generally when a drought's in place, that's when we sort of get that central government direction, and they, I don't think they give it a term, generally through MDI or one of those central government organisations, but they define it as a drought. And the sort of characteristics of a drought are reduced stream flows and groundwater levels, And there is potential, there's been predictions that through climate change those droughts could become kind of worse, more extended and potentially more frequent. The water shortage event, which is a body of work that we're now sort of involved with over the last couple of years, is more of a temporary shortage of water. So it's certainly on the back of a drought, generally, but it doesn't necessarily have to correlate with a drought. So for example, at the moment, we've still had quite low flows through some of our rivers and streams in the Bay of Plenty, even though we've had quite a bit of rain, and you probably wouldn't say that we're in drought conditions. The impacts are obviously on ecosystems and cultural flows, and potentially affects people accessing their water, both in groundwater and surface water. And the duration and the scale of the water shortage event can be variable, and in fact it can cover large bodies or parts of the region or New Zealand, but when we talk about the Bay of Plenty, large areas within the Bay of Plenty, it can actually go right down to a single catchment or even a stretch of the stream, so it can be quite variable in its scale. And the key thing in red there is that often people think, well, the drought's over because we've had a bit of rain. In a water shortage event, it's not necessarily the same thing. We need a prolonged period of rain to generally ease the problem. So over the last 2 years, I've finished with a quick summary. So some parts of the Bay of Plenty over the last 2 years have only had about 50% of their summer rainfall. So that kind of reflects the dry conditions we've had since pretty much 2019. And the annual rainfall has also been down about 25%. And that annual rainfall is really important because that's what feeds into our groundwater systems, builds up those groundwater levels, and helps with spring flows and stream flows. Last year, this whole water shortage event process sort of kicked off in early 2020 when we had some particularly dry conditions experienced in the western part of the Bay of Plenty, sort of more towards Kaitiaki way. But this year, throughout pretty much early 2020, right through even till now, we've seen some very low flows from streams that are originating from the sort of Mamaku, Kaimai area, flowing back towards Rotorua, to Paraiti, some of these streams around here, Kaupiriroa, and so quite a lot of streams originating from that catchment or from that range. We've had some of our recorded streams are sort of since the 70s, so 40, 50 years of stream flow, and some of them have reached the lowest ever recorded figures in that period. So it gives you an idea that we are in quite uncharted territory in the Bay of Plenty at the moment. And of course that means, as I said, when we've got lower rainfall, we get lower recharge. Recharge is the amount of rain that sort of falls on the land and filters its way down into our groundwater resources. And then of course, when we've got dry and warm conditions, we also get more of a water demand. And we've seen that particularly for things like irrigation, some of the commercial use, even municipal takes. I suppose it's been tempered a little bit with COVID and less visitor numbers and things, so we're not seeing too much of a peak in that area. And just a point there, particularly last year, when all this kicked off in around February, March, April, that's obviously correlated with when COVID hit, so it made it quite challenging for us to actually get out in the field and monitor the impacts of these low stream flows. So early last year we set up a water shortage process, and I was appointed in an acting role. It's just a part of my role to develop a system of, I suppose, classifying what stage we're at, with the ultimate view that we could put out what's called a water shortage direction, and I'll get onto that later. But that's basically a tool that we could impose restrictions over and above what consent conditions impose. And early last year we started producing situation reports, very much like a civil defence type response, and we sent those out to a number of parties, and we've actually created a web page so public and anyone that's interested can access that. Got the details of that later, and obviously increased our media coverage around it. We also importantly created a water shortage decision group, so that's to give if we were to impose water restrictions, that comes at a price. So it's either going to impact communities, it's going to impact businesses. For example, if we restricted kiwifruit irrigation at that peak time, it could have a significant impact on crops. So in order to be confident that we're making a very robust decision, we developed a decision group, and that's with very senior management in council. And that formed last year. We met a few times during the process last year. We didn't get to that level this year. And just recently, we've actually learnt some lessons from the original sort of standard operating procedure, and we've tweaked that a bit, and we've also renewed our Chief Executive, Fiona McTavish's delegation to issue a water shortage direction should it be needed. So this is the, I don't expect you to read this, but I understand it is in the agenda, is the sort of summary of the SOP. Basically, for all of Bay of Plenty at the moment, we're in level 0, so that's just a sort of standard operating conditions. But I would say we are still internally closely monitoring that what I called the Rotorua focus zone, which is around that Mamaku area feeding out to those streams I referred to earlier. Level 1, that's when we've certainly been at level 1 and in fact to level 2 over the last 18-20 months. And that's when we're starting to see that streams are dropping and we start to have a bit more of a focus on those critical areas. Level 2 is when it's getting pretty serious, and it got to this stage in the Rotorua focus zone this year, where that's when we start communicating directly with consent holders, getting a bit more publicity, obviously doing more closer, more regular assessments of the situation. And then we'd get down to level 3, which we've never been to, acknowledging it's only been in place for since March last year. We've not had to issue a water shortage direction, but when we do, that's the level would be. And these levels can be just for small parts of the region. They don't have to be for the whole of the Bay of Plenty. The basic process is just really there's sort of 4 parts to it. There's assessing, so we've got a whole series of monitoring networks of streams and groundwater across the Bay of Plenty, plus rainfall and soil moisture monitoring. So all that feeds into those situation reports that I was referring to. We also rely on NIWA forecasts and Met Service and other external parties. Our data services and science team do a lot of the number crunching and assessments and take into account the predictions, the sort of near forecast predictions, and then we kind of bring all that together and make a decision on where we should be. It's not just one person making that decision. If as the event progresses, we get our communications going, and so we are emailing those SIT reps out to a group of stakeholders, plus also putting all of that information onto our webpage for everybody. There has been some e-pānuis released as well over the last couple of years, and so that's our method at the moment for informing and engaging. Within those areas of concern, we're obviously having a lot more one-on-one engagement with consent holders at that point. And then just that information, we get a lot of communication out, we produce media releases, we're working with our other neighbouring councils where possible so that we're sending clear and consistent messaging, and obviously that direct relationship with consent holders themselves. So if we were to issue a water shortage direction, I thought I'd just quickly run through what that means. So under section 329 of the Resource Management Act, it allows us to put in restrictions on people taking water. It's not limited to just consent holders, but that's our general focus because they are the larger users. But in theory, we could also put limits on people taking permitted activity volumes of water. So for streams, that's less than 15 cubic metres a day, and for groundwater, that's less than 35 cubic metres per day. The challenge there, though, is that we don't really know where they all are because anyone can do that. In the current rules, there's no requirement to register with the regional council. And then the other aspect that people can take, just for clarity for your information, is that they can take their reasonable domestic needs and the reasonable water needs for their stock as well. Section 329 not only limits water takes, but you could also put controls and restrictions on discharges to waterways as well. That's something we haven't yet considered, but in a scenario where there's a stream that was receiving potentially a industrial or municipal discharge into it, you could potentially put restrictions on what's going into that stream as well. It's very flexible. It doesn't outline exactly what those restrictions should look like. They do end after 14 days, and you've got to go through a process of renewing and reissuing or cancelling. And as I said before, they can cover the whole of the region, or they can cover small parts of the rohi. And for example, in this case, it could be just say the Waiari stream. And we've looked at that for some of those other waterways that we've talked about. And as I said, it can take any sort of form. It's not restricted to one sort of template. So what I thought I'd just quickly cover off now, for the interest of time, is a few examples of the sort of streams that we've been seeing, stream flows we've been seeing in this particular rohi. So really to do with the Rotorua focus zone and the streams that come from there. So this is the Waiari. Now this trend you're going to see in the next 3 slides. So this isn't unique to the Waiari. And what we have looked at is rainfall and recharge, and that kind of correlates to tell us a picture that we're in a particular pattern at the moment where rainfall's low, recharge is low, stream flows as a result, because most of our streams start from the spring, and those springs are fed from groundwater. So this trend, wherever you see this, this is the instantaneous. It's a mean daily flow, the black line. But wherever you see the very bottom there, the bottom blue, if this black line correlates with the bottom, that's the lowest ever flow recorded in the history. And this record, the Waiari, this is Tauranga City Council's information, starts in 2000 for us. But if we go to something like the Nongataha, again, those records start in 1975, and you can see pretty much since mid-2020, there's been periods of time where that's a very low flow, and this year it reflects particularly low flows. There's no big abstractions occurring from there or anything like that. This is just natural stream flows as a result of rainfall and a lack of recharge. If we move to the Kaupererua on the other side there of Tauranga City, very similar again. For a long period of time in the last year or two, it's been the lowest ever flows, and that's been 30 something years worth of records. But that general trend over the last few years has been dropping flows. And another example, the Paraiti here to our east, is very similar. And in fact, this is very low flows, significantly lower than what we've seen before. And as you can see, again, since late last year, it's been pretty consistently the lowest ever flows recorded. And again, there's no abstractions or anything occurring there. It's a symptom of the conditions that we're in at the moment. And this is created by our science team, and I'm not going to get into too much of the detail, but because I don't understand it. But what I can tell you is that really what you're looking at here is the rainfall figures on the left-hand part of the graph, and for the same period on the right-hand side, you can see what actually infiltrates, what percentage of that rainfall makes its way into the groundwater. And you can see over, there's a bit of a trend that occurs, and at the moment we're on a downward trend. Hopefully it'll start to pick up again, but you can see that compared with, say, 2017-18, the amount of water that is filtering down into our groundwater is significantly reduced. And that's been reflected around this particular area with farmers, for example, noticing that their shallow wells that they may be drawing stock water from, they're struggling to access. The water's drying up a bit. And that's not unexpected in these sort of events, because that top water table drops a bit, only has to drop a metre or two, and that's enough for those shallow wells to run dry. I thought I'd just cover off a little bit of the forecast. So this is the sort of information that our science, our data services team are sort of looking at pretty regularly, recognising that forecasts are just that, and so they don't always pan out the way they are, but what the way they are predicting. But we are pretty much embedded into a La Nina effect weather system. From what I understand, that potentially could bring us a few sort of tail end of those subtropical storms. We thought we may have got some last year, we seem to miss them, but they are predicting there's a higher chance this year for that, so we could get some of that heavy rain. Sea temperatures are up. Soil moisture levels at the moment are near normal. It'd be interesting to hear if it's what your take is on it, but our moisture monitoring and that of NIWA's is showing pretty near normal sort of soil moisture at the moment. We are going to have quite warm temperatures, so that could drive an increase in demand. And interestingly, rainfall totals are most likely to be near normal. That may indicate that some of the rain we're going to get, though, is going to be those big bursts of rain. So that doesn't necessarily tell the full picture. So we may get near normal rainfall, but it's the way that rain arrives is what's going to be important to help us get through these drier conditions. And the prediction is that river flows are most likely to be near normal. And we're seeing that for all of the rivers across Toimaina at the moment, except for that particular focus area. And then at the end, I just want a bit of a plug. So we've got a web page where there's a lot of environmental data that's available for people to access. I'll make sure that this presentation is given through, so you can get these web links. But there's some really good information around, like I say, soil moisture, river flows, groundwater levels, rainfall, a whole heap of interesting information there, and it's done geospatially, so you can pick a point on a map and find the data there. Also, a bit of a plug for our drought page, our dry weather page. All of the situation reports, all of the information that I've been showing is linked in through that. And then also the NIWA report there, that seems to be quite a good opportunity to see what the current state is and what the forecast state is going to be. So that was a very quick presentation on the sort of water shortage work, but I'm more than happy to take questions from the floor. Thank you.
Yeah. Your report was like a ambulance ready to tip over the cliff. Have you taken into account things like, I call it the nooks and crannies, that links into the Waiari, that gives the Waiari a life force? That's all the Raparapa Hoi, the Oiana and all those creeks that are supposed to be well protected, because they're the life force of the Waiari. And the regional parks, where you have a number of aqua filters that also feeds into the Waiari. Have you done a evaluation on that, bearing in mind that the big issue is global warming?
Yeah. Well, personally, my body of work doesn't look at all of that detail, but I could pretty confidently say that those other streams that are flowing into the Waiari would all be showing similar characteristics, because we're seeing that drop in flow across a large area with the headwaters coming out of that Mamaku Kaimai area. So I would imagine that it's not just the main Waiari stem that's flowing low, it'll be all the other tributaries also that would be flowing low. That's not taken into account through my body of work, but that is certainly some of the information and some of the thinking, my understanding is, around the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, and all of those discussions are happening. I'm presuming that you will all be involved with those through some way or another. And that's that's where all of those other aspects are being taken into account. But through my water shortage work, I would hate to think how many streams and rivers there are within the Bay of Plenty, and so we can't kind of drill down to every one. We can only really look at the areas that we're monitoring. If those monitoring sites show a significant decline, that's when we'd start to mobilise and look at the catchment and look for environmental effects within the streams.
Riparian Protections? Is that built into your...
That's not in my body of work, but obviously that is a huge area of work for both regional council, landowners, iwi, throughout the Bay of Plenty, because I think it's recognised that good riparian management has a whole heap of good effects, such as shading and reducing temperatures and so on. But that, again, is my area of work is really, as you said, almost the infants at the bottom of the cliff. When things get that bad, what controls do we have to put in to safeguard the health of that waterway? Yeah.
Okay, I've got Gary and then John.
Yeah, a couple of questions, and sorry it repeats the one I asked at the last meeting. Do you know the return period from rainwater to recharge the underground aquifers? It's not
They'll be
instantaneous.
variable over the whole of the region. In relation to the Waiari, I'd probably want to speak to someone like Peter or someone that I understand.
But have we got the data so we know what the recharge rates are?
I personally don't. It's not my area of work, sorry, but I don't know if somebody else would. I'm sure that work's been done because that's part of the kind of assessment of effects when they're applying for consents. And is that something, Peter, that you can talk to?
It's something that we've done fairly recently. We just, in fact, are awaiting a final report from GHD who've done the work for us. But the early indications are that there's a linkage between rainfall events, groundwater recharge, and the stream flows. On one of our existing source water streams, the Toto, the indication is that there's roughly a year's lag between very good groundwater recharge and that coming through to the stream itself. We're still in a decline, as Steve has indicated. The groundwater recharge is at a low ebb, so we're still expecting some decline before we see recovery. But the indication is, my understanding is you need about 25 millimetres of rainfall to get that penetration into the groundwater recharge. As indicated, you've got rainfall versus groundwater recharge, so you've got a difference there, and you need that soaking effect to allow it to penetrate. And what we're seeing is that we haven't had those type of events because of the lack of rainfall over the last 3 years, and that's what's influencing particularly our source water streams at this time.
Thank you. My other question's on the graph on page 43, and I referred to this at our last meeting. Doesn't actually tell me the story that I'm trying to find out. We've had a change in the way the rain arrives. We're getting these significant dumps, and we know this across the district, across the whole area. And so when we get those heavy dumps, they tend to flood and go straight out, so they actually don't fit the recharge model. And so have we any data on that, on those flows, so that we know what's coming forward? Because, you know, when you look at the Waiari here, it's not a pretty look. And we really need to understand this whole thing. And we asked the question at the last, and I'm sure Shad's going to help me later on. We wanted an analysis of the Waiari from top to bottom, the infeeding and the impacts of these change in weather patterns now, where the rain's coming in a totally different form than it has in the past. And what is the impact on that? Because we're getting a high flood events, which has got an erosion problem as well as a quality of water problem. But a lot of it goes out to sea, so it's not fitting the recharge model. And I just wonder if you've got any trends over the 20-year period that show that happening?
No, sorry, I obviously wasn't here at the last meeting. I wasn't aware. I'm not sure who was given that task to look at, but it's not part of my body of work, so I can't answer that. Sorry, it's not.
All right, thank you.
Yes, I had a couple of questions actually, but the first one, Steve, there's been a lot of reference to rainfall and recharge, and given the way, I guess I'm talking wider than just the Waiari here, but the way regional council manage consents for groundwater quite separately to surface water, do you think that remains appropriate to continue in that vein? Given
You're
the
probably
amount
well
you've
aware
talked-
that there's a lot of work going on at the moment around that space. So I can say that in many situations where they are considering a groundwater take, they're also considering the impact on surface water. So certain takes, when they, to do with proximity to a water body and depth, they know that there's a high likelihood there'll be some relationship there. And so they do consider that through newer consents. I'm not sure when that came on the continued side. But I do know that through the work that is going on around the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, looking at reviewing the whole way water is allocated and managed, that those are exactly the sort of questions they're working on. So, and that body of work has to be completed by 2024, I think. So we're right in the middle of that now. I think they've done a lot of the work on the science, and now it's about engaging and having those discussions within the community, because it can have significant impacts on allocation, as you're probably well aware.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not sure whether my other question's best for Steve to answer or not, but I'm just trying to understand. Steve's been talking about the work regional council's been doing around managing water shortage. I read in the paper Tauranga City bringing in some proposals in terms of managing water, and then I see in our recommendations here we're required to approve, and I'm not sure what our mandate is in terms of approving those things in terms of what other bodies or so on. So I just wonder if we could have a bit of an explanation about what our mandate covers here.
We just received the report.
Yeah, that's that one, but what about those two?
Yes.
Richard, are you able to answer that question?
Well, we've got 3 recommendations here. It's no problem accepting the report, but what is our mandate to
Approve.
approve these management processes that regional council and Tauranga City Council and so on are putting in place?
This is a recommendation for us to support.
Well, we'll come to that perhaps later, shall we? We stop at 1?
Yeah.
Maybe?
That's not our report.
Yeah, no, I can happily accept 1.
That's not our report.
All we're doing is receiving this as a document.
Okay.
This is for information only.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think you've got a copy of the full agenda report.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you for the report. I support what Gary mentioned about the state of the resource. I think we do need a better handle on recharge rates, and we also need a better handle on what water's been taken from the catchment, from the wide catchment. I appreciate the presentation and taking a kind of a broader Western Bay perspective in terms of the trends and how things are looking or have declined over recent periods. But I do think from this committee's perspective, we do need kind of a catchment perspective of actually what's happening in this particular catchment. So we have a role in terms of working together to best protect and manage and look after the resource that we have. And I think from my perspective, there's a whole lot of moving parts. I mean, there's water takes being taken from within the catchment. There'll be unconsented takes, permitted takes, and all of that has an impact. along with climate. And I don't get a sense of an overall view for this particular catchment and how we're managing it. I mean, we're at the end where we've got a plant. We were taking water from a resource that is in decline. And so there's a whole lot of decisions that are made beyond us, and we're kind of at the point where we take water to essentially supply the rest of our communities to be able to use for human consumption. And understand that those takes further upstream of, so whether that's kiwi fruit or farming or for other uses, commercial uses, and yet it's putting a strain on access for potable drinking water. I think it would be useful, for the committee to maybe at some point receive a report on actually what is the current state of the resource from the source, from the mountains, essentially to the sea. And then also forecasting. So what does that look like in 20, 50 years' time? If we continue to follow current trends. I mean, we have a responsibility to manage the plant and the distribution of water to our communities. But we need information to be able to make informed decisions about how we do that.
No, and I apologise if the request has been lost in translation. I was asked to present on the water shortage work, but the information that you're seeking is certainly available. So, in fact, it's almost the best time now moving forward to get good quality information, because over the last 10 years or so now, there's been a requirement, which wasn't a requirement of all consents, but now there's a requirement that everybody that's taking water has to meter and supply records. So for the first time ever, and that's actually being boosted just recently by also requiring them to telemeter as well. So we're getting live data in most cases. That's for the larger takes. So I think your request is well timed in that we already know the consented takes. We're now getting a very good understanding of the abstraction, because a kiwi fruit orchard allowed to take 1,000 cubic metres a day for irrigation may only do that 20 times in a year, unlike a municipal take, which would be every day. So there's different things that just reading the consent conditions doesn't tell you the full picture. So that can certainly be done. And in relation to forecasting, that's obviously a little bit more difficult. The only thing that should give you a little bit of confidence is that if anyone does apply to take a consent, the existing users are taken into account with any decision making. So it's not like someone could put something above your intake to take out a large hunk of the stream if it's having any impact on other users. And obviously there's a whole heap of other things that come into that decision around environmental and cultural effects, etc. So I think that the forecast part's a little bit difficult, particularly 50 years' time, but I mean, you drive around, you see a lot of development going on at the moment, so there is going to be increased demand on water compared with now. The unconsented stuff is important, and it's something that's definitely become more visible to us over the last few years through what was called Plan Change 9, which is our water rules. And pleasingly, our council has just this year, in fact, in the last month, we've employed 2 people to just look at permitted activity monitoring and focused largely around water takes. So we're increasing our capacity in that whole water monitoring space because we see it as a taonga, just as everyone else does, and it's got to be managed well. And all the MPS FM direction certainly pushing us that way. And I think over the coming years we'll be in a lot stronger position to clearly answer the sort of questions that you're raising now. But we could do an interim report that would answer perhaps some of those questions. So I'd suggest through you, Chair, that maybe if you want to document what you want to see, we'll attempt to try and cover that off in a future report.
I do have a draft resolution. Good.
One step ahead.
Yeah, and just so because we're a Kaitiaki group, which is not just volume related, it's value or quality related as well. Any information once we get the resolution sorted out that tells us the underlying quality levels in the water coming, because we're receiving an export from Rotorua and further up the
Water
aquifer.
quality,
Yeah. Any information that's available there for us to look at, to say, because if it's coming to us in a format, there's very little we can do in our part of what we're supposed to be managing here to influence it. So any understanding that would be helpful too.
I'm not sure, but I would be surprised if we haven't got a significant amount of water quality information on the Waiari, given that it's got some large users and discharges into it.
But I'm going right up to the headwaters
where
it's a discharge from.
Well, they'll be monitoring down the length, but whether it's at the headwaters, I'm not sure. But yeah, certainly if that's part of the request, we'll look at that as well.
Thank you.
Joel?
Kia ora. The monitors you just mentioned, are they monitoring the Waiari?
They are the permanent monitoring. So there's different things going on.
I'm talking about for unconsented takes.
Oh, sorry. Well, they can do. So we're only literally, they've come on board in the last month. One of the mandates is to look at unconsented activities. So obviously that's a massive task across the whole of the bay. So what my understanding is they're currently working on as a work stream. They're, for instance, where new bores have gone in and we've never seen a water take consent, they'll focus on following those ones up. Or if there's activity that we believe would typically require a consent and there is none, we'll follow those up. Yeah, we're not yet, I don't think, just sticking to one particular stream.
Yeah, I'm asking because I've raised this before about whether the Waiari specifically is being monitored for illegal takes.
Mm-hmm. I would say that at the moment it wouldn't be.
Are there any current consent applications on the table for the Waiari?
I'm not aware of them, but sorry, it's not my area, but we could find out for you. Certainly not a problem to find that out.
All right, it's been brought to my attention these waterways in Tauranga, Tautau, Waiau Tautei, I think it's called, Kopu Rererua, they're all running at poor rates at the moment. Obviously the Waiari and the Paraiti and the same thing, in the same category. Looking at your situation report here, it says there's been a lack of groundwater recharge over the last 3 years. Now, this is alarm bells to me because if the recharge isn't happening for the last 3 years, what does the next 3 years or beyond look like for that? And Peter's just said that it takes roughly a year for rain to fall, penetrate 25, however deep it was, for it to start recharging the aquifers and so on. This is all alarm bells for Tapawica. And I'll say it again that the Waiari is not looking great at the moment, and when we get to November, I think it is next year, well, that's most likely to double when we start taking the water out of the river. Not looking good at all. There's a bit in this report here which talks about implications for Māori. Are you able to talk to that?
I can try, but I think the general direction of the implications for Māori is that through the MPSFM, that's where, because I'm not sure if it's referring to the cultural flow assessment sort of work, or is it just around communications? I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Would you like me to read it out? Sure. Māori may be impacted by decisions made during water shortage events, both as users and Kaitiaki of the water. As outlined in sections 2.3 and 2.4, staff consider it appropriate to inform iwi hapu of conditions and decisions rather than engaging. This is because of the short timeframes during which decisions need to be made and because of the extensive engagement planned in the near future as part of the EFPP.
Yeah. So in summary, the challenge with water shortage directions in particular is they're a tool that needs to be able to be used and quite quickly and also cancelled and amended quite quickly. And so what that is referring to effectively is that particularly the cultural impact side of waterway management is huge. There's no denying that. But to be, as I touched on before, we could be talking 300 streams across the Bay of Plenty that we're having to make decisions on at short notice. It's virtually impossible to be able to go out and engage on each one of those particular streams. And as a decision, recognising that this is an interim solution, what I'm doing now is an interim solution until it's developed more robustly through the MPSFM. All of those discussions, those hui on those particular matters and all the science and everything else that's going to feed into that will be formed over the next 3 years. It's just about impossible to replicate all that mahi in the timeframes that I've got to make a decision on. So we can take into account, and we've got factors that we consider. We certainly will take into account cultural impacts where they are known and documented, but we just simply wouldn't have time to be able to go out and individually, particularly if it's just stretches of a stream or larger catchments or even wider, to engage that way. And I mean, it's tough. It's not sitting comfortably, but I think we've got to recognise that this has only come about in the last 18 months. It's going to take a lot of mahi. I mean, I don't know how long you've all been working on the Waiari cultural assessments and flows, but you'd recognise it's not. You can't just have one hui and get a number out of it. So it's actually very difficult, and to do it justice, we feel that the correct process is going through that longer engagement process. And I accept that may not fit comfortably, and it doesn't particularly fit comfortably with myself, but I think it's the best way forward.
Well, I'm hearing a bunch of excuses, and there's 3 iwi sitting at the table here and now. It's not hard to make 3 phone calls. Yeah, I know you might be talking on a regional basis, but we're talking about the Waiari here.
Mm. Yep, I think Mayor Gary has mentioned it about floodwater, wasting water going out to sea. Is there any provisions in your planning to water bank, if you like, those floodwaters as a secondary use, probably for kiwi fruit farming or for whatever, to create reservoirs,
Yes,
to reserve that water?
Sorry, that's certainly allowed for in the RMA and in our planning documents. Water harvesting is something that is seen to be quite a positive opportunity to be able to store water. Recognising that floods themselves have a really important role in the health of the river, so you wouldn't want to you wouldn't want to flatten off all those peaks, because those peaks are important as well. But there are situations in the Bay of Plenty where that is happening.
It's obviously the national policy will play a big part with that introduction. And we could probably play a leading role in reaffirming the national policy statement and resource nationally, being resource nationally.
Yeah, no, I'm actually in a different camp to you there, Mo. To me, unfortunately, the regional council can't impact.
That's right.
What it requires, I think, we have to make sure the points you raise are valid. There has to be a submission to the national policy statement on freshwater management, on where this should sit, and I think that's where it's got to be done. The regional council basically just got to implement whatever the policy statement. So it's up for submissions right now, isn't it? Chad, are you aware of that?
The
freshwater management national policy statement.
Well,
They're working on it, aren't they?
Well, I think the legislation's in place, and we're now working on implementing the national policy statement for freshwater management, and that's all the sort of hui and the science and everything that's combining, and they have to have a proposed new set of planning documents out by, I think, late 2024.
So I think whoever your representatives are on whether it's the iwi Leaders Forum, whatever, you need to get through to them to make sure that your concerns are valid concerns. I don't think they're just a tangata whenua concern either, they're a
Yeah.
bigger picture concern. And we need to try and make sure that they take into account through the policy statement.
I am aware that the regional council have got an engagement program through the EPS in terms of the regional planning, and there is a stream of work engaging with tangata whenua.
Is it right?
Yeah, and I think that next year is pretty much that's when all that engagement really kicks in. My understanding is that this year was around collating all the science, next year it's around engaging.
So if you could make sure these people are aware of whatever the channels are so that they can actually get their way through.
Band the bomb.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Hello?
Colour's got a colour.
Just coming up here because there's a mic. Kia ora tātou. Just listening to the conversation, I just wonder whether there's an opportunity to test the strength of this committee or this advisory group to some degree. And I hear our mate over here in terms of those processes, but the data we've seen in front of us represents to some degree an emergency. To some degree, the concerns that are being raised by the whānau is that the impacts are happening here and now, and notwithstanding the usual process might be a consultation and engagement process that might be a bit more reactive, i.e. we have data that indicates a water shortage, therefore we need to make a decision in whichever time frame, and then the usual process being contacting, waiting for feedback and so forth. But I wonder whether that's worth discussing here and an opportunity to be more proactive than that. What if the fact was on the Waiari that actually there's a resourced way for tangata whenua to actually feed into receiving the resource consents as soon as they come here and being part of the decision-making process alongside regional council as they consider that at that point in time, which would then also enable them to be right at the table at the point when, say, a water shortage type intervention type trigger might come in all its various forms. So I guess what I'm saying is there an opportunity to actually take our engagement levels to a new level rather than being reactive and following those traditional reach out and wait for a response type consultation arrangements. What if it's actually resourced for the Waiari, for the Kaitiaki of the Waiari, to actually sit right on the panel that receives the resource consents and considers all of the actions that come through. And it kind of, that thought pattern is I guess, triggered by looking at some of the data that we see with these downward trends. And then I guess one question that I had that I couldn't see the answer to here is, with the interventions that have been suggested that can be used, how do we know which of those interventions has the most impact on the actual water level and the actual taonga that we're seeking to protect? And do we have an understanding of what level we might need to do? If we need to do extra water take restrictions on any particular consent holders and otherwise, do we know across the network how much of that would we actually have to do to then stop a decline and turn around the decline that we've seen in the rivers? So there's a few questions along there. My main suggestion is there an opportunity here for this group to relook at the way we engage on the Waiari River with tangata whenua and utilise this as true kaitiakitanga would mean they would be right there looking at the resource consent with all of the other information that's there, and then helping with that decision-making process at the point of the decision, not advising from afar. Kia ora.
Yeah, I've got another question about discharge limits. Are there current discharge limits?
Any resource consent that's discharging will have some sort of limits on it.
Okay.
Both on potentially volume and also water quality parameters. Discharge quality parameters.
Yeah, and I had emailed Ruben asking about monitoring across the Takapu or Tapawica the waterways, and he sent me a link, which I think was one of the links you had on there. I also asked them for some support around that so we can understand what's in the link on the program and stuff like that. This was several weeks ago now. Hoping you could pass that on to, please.
Okay, so I do have a resolution. An additional resolution that the Bay of Plenty Council provides some analysis of the Waiari catchment from the Maunga, the mountains to the sea, in its current state, in its current form. That's so we can get a better handle and better understanding on what we're currently looking at. I mean, we can see the trends going down. We don't have I don't have a good understanding around what's being taken from the catchment.
So just to be clear, that's around water takes.
Yes. Yeah. And I think we're talking about quantity. I mean, the quantity issue will affect the quality issue. But from a quantity perspective, because we're talking about the health and well-being of the river, if you're taking too much water, then the resource is going to suffer. Yeah, so that's my resolution.
Any questions from the floor? I'm quite to second that if you wanted for process.
Yes, okay. It's up to the chairs if they can take a question from the floor.
Up to you. Let's do the resolution.
Helen, can you just wait 1 second? We'll just sort this resolution and we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Did you, just picking up on that query, did you want to specifically specify so that the Regional Council provides analysis of the Waiari catchment from the Milga to the Moana in its current state? Do you want to specify in terms of water, the context of water takes, or just the current state of its flow?
I think from what I hear you're asking is an analysis of the water takes on the Waiari stream and look at the actual sort of volumes that are allocated plus the actual use stuff, so you get a picture of what's allocated and what's actually being taken out as a first step. And did you also want to look at discharges into there, or just water takes at this stage?
I think for the purpose of this, it's just the volumes at this stage, because we're only focused pretty much on the volumes here. Is this actually sustainable? Because it's not, it's not looking pretty at the moment, and we're about to make a significant take off it. So is that actually the right decision? So we need some information to make that call. If there was some quality information available as well, that could come pro bono, we would be happy with that.
Thanks, Chair. In terms of the Regional Council coming back with that, I think it could also be included in the report some discussion around what the Council is doing on the permitted activity takes, so that we actually have some understanding of what all that process is and what the priority is for monitoring those permitted takes at the same time.
Yeah, and when we talk about permitted activity monitoring, we also talk about unconsented monitoring.
Yes.
Because in reality, permitted activity monitoring might be someone taking 1,000 litres to water their garden or something, but we're interested in people taking 50,000 cubic or 50 cubic metres to irrigate a hectare of orchard. So it's that sort of scale. We'll never really be monitoring the small domestic user.
Thank you.
You have to change that. Helen.
Thank you both for allowing me to ask a question. I just have a comment to make in terms of your report and what you've just read. Now, I hear what you say about water harvesting, and I guess this is probably a question for Tapawica City Council and Western Bay Plenty District Council, as well as Regional Council, is looking at water recycling. I saw a report that came across the alternative options for Te Waiari, and they identified in there, I think it was going to other industries to look at water recycling as an option. I think it was Dairy New Zealand that said, no, that's not nice because it ends up in the food chain. Well, that water ends up in our river and ends up in the estuary, and we eat it. So it's in our water chain, in our food chain. But I think moving forward, given climate change, we really need to look at recycling our water. I mean, we flush good quality drinking water down the toilet. I mean, it's just crazy. So that's all I have to say.
Kia ora for that.
So are there any
that part of your question is really probably more aimed at the municipal, so Tauranga City or Western Bay, but in relation to water use, say in dairy sheds or at orchards, there is a real drive both from industry, who lead a lot of this, but also the regional council, to make sure that water isn't just allocated willy-nilly nowadays. You know, like I think if you go back 20 years or 30 years when the RMA first came in, whatever you applied for, you got. Now there's a lot of work gone into making sure that whatever you're applying for is actually an efficient use of that water. And so that's, as consents are replaced, we're seeing quite significant reductions in the volumes of water that they were previously allocated. So I think that's a kind of a step in the direction you're referring to, in that it's not an ability to recycle in that scenario, but it is an ability to cut back on the amount of use by using better technology, applying it at the right times, and different systems. But the water recycling stuff is outside of my area, but I think that's something that most municipals will be looking at. And the importance of that is that they also get tested when they come to apply for resource consents, that their systems are set up in a way that is efficiently using water wherever possible. So, you know, things like water metering that we wouldn't have seen 20 years ago is now commonplace in towns around the district. And so that's a way of ensuring that domestic users are actually using it efficiently as well. So there is a move in the right direction. And when you just touched on the dairy recycling water, and John might want to touch on this as well, but my understanding is that there is an ability more than ever now to be able to recycle a lot of that water. It just can't get too close to the parlour, to the milking platform. But I do know that some, they call it greenwash water, is stored and then used as keeping the yards wet and things. So they are doing little things to improve that as well as being more efficient with the milk cooling and stuff like that. So yeah, there is ways of reducing the amount of water used in most commercial operations. Thank you.
Just read out then the resolution as it stands at the moment, that the Waiari Kaitiaki Advisory Group A receives the Bay of Plenty Regional Council Water Shortage Management Report. B, that Bay of Plenty Regional Council provides a water quantity analysis report of the Waiari catchment from the Monga to the Moana in its current state. And at the moment it's been moved by Shared and seconded by Mayor Weber.
All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Richard, thank you.
I'll largely take the project update report as read, but I will, I guess, just off the back of the discussion just had, our planning team have a study underway. It's a freshwater management tool to look at the longer term status, so or to improve the understanding of the resources that we draw water from. So if the Kaitiaki Advisory Group is amenable, happy to bring something back on that front. Neither Peter or I kind of have the deep enough understanding to talk to it right now, but happy to bring something back to talk to that particular piece of work that's underway. Fantastic. only other, I guess, main thing from my project update report, just talking to the water supply report. So, as kind of appearing here, we've analysed information that we've received from Tapawica Marae, have gone back to them with a few more queries and looking to support those marae reps with closing out the information requests that we've put to them. In addition, we have put the same information request to Waitaha and to Ngāti Whakauē, sorry. And we're working with them on that. We've had a good initial discussion with Ngāti Whakauē the other day, and I'm very pleased to see Mokoera join Te Kapa o Waitaha, and we'll be working with Mokoera on the Waitaha side of this report as well. So it's still in progress. We are working on it, but this one will take a bit of time, so not going to be resolved as swiftly as I guess originally anticipated when the report was asked for by the CAG, but we are progressing that at as fast a pace as we can. So other than that, I'm happy just to field questions on the report.
I've got a question, Richard. Richard, is Tūharangi Marae or Tūharangi Ki Otakawa included in the marae?
Tūharangi, yes, it is.
Okay.
Yeah,
because Tūharangi Marae sits outside of Tapawica Iwi Authority.
Yeah, we're aware of that, but the resolution at the last CAG was updated to include Tūharangi and the Waitaha and Ngāti Whakauē marae as well. So yeah, it's within that scope.
Okay. You'll be talking to me, correct, about Tūharangi?
You are the rep?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
I've got a question as well, and I presume we're talking about the Tapawica water supply report.
Correct.
Correct.
I'm a bit nervous of putting any more staff time into that, because under the Three Waters review reform, the problem's going to be solved whether we do a report or not. And I wonder whether this is a duplication of the effort that's been, Three Water reform is addressing this very issue. So, I just wonder whether we're better to let the Three Waters reform go through the process before we do much more work on this, because that's one of the fundamentals of is freshwater and wastewater processing for marae and other organisations throughout New Zealand. So this is basically a duplication of that, I see.
Just, can you help me to understand, in terms of the Three Waters reform and everything that's happening, if that's the case, then how would our marae receive water from the Waiari water tape?
Well, that'll be the new entity to provide that, and then it's whatever the rules that.
So then we're back to square one.
Yes.
And start all over again.
Well, it'll be decided at a national level how the services will be provided.
Is there any other way around that? Like, we understand that this whole joint water take was done because there was a memorandum of understanding between two councils. Can the two councils not do that today with tangata whenua in terms of this report?
Well, I think the work would be the cost of doing it, and who's going to pay. Because the current rules as an impediment. That's why the central government is reforming it.
Okay. Then I guess we're asking Western Bay, because the marae fall within the Western Bay region. So therefore we're asking you to fund it, and we're asking you from your water take to deal with it.
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, under the Local Government Act,
Yeah.
it's outside of the mandate of local government to fund those assets. And that's why central government, and it's not just Western Bay, this is a national issue, and that's why central government's saying, well, we will mandate it, and we will sort it out. because we come to an impasse. It's outside of our mandate to provide reticulated water and wastewater, unless there's some costs, and that's all this report's going to tell us. And we know that. Whereas the reform is to make sure that the impediments in the current Local Government Act are overridden.
Let's see.
It's not going to sit well with him.
I'll just make a comment. I think you're right. It's about the Local Government Act, and that needs to be changed probably nationally. That there needs to be an alteration in the Local Government Act. And so the ratings and all those sort of things that goes into the mix will take into account that, say, marae provides an essential social service to to the community, just like the churches and the rest of them.
And that's the, if you read the legislation, that's one of the fundamental things that's coming through it.
Yeah.
And it's been mandated.
Yeah.
So what the issue is now is some of us have to sit around and work out what is the best process for that to happen. What's the governance and all that sort of stuff. So it's in train. Shed.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No,
I just got a question.
Yep.
Just as part of this discussion. So, in terms of the Three Waters proposal, that proposal around providing tangata whenua and marae Māori communities with access to water, is that guaranteed? Is that locked in terms of the Three Waters proposal?
No.
It should be recommended.
I mean, is that? I suppose I'm just wanting to get some.
I'm not 100% sure because you're getting right down to the detail now, but that's my understanding.
There's an intent there to do that.
Yes, yeah, because the Rating Act makes it prohibitive, and with all due respect, running a pipeline from the Waiari to each individual marae, it's just not cost effective. So what they're looking at is what is the most cost effective way of getting water to these facilities, and how do they do that? So that's my understanding of what these new entities will be tasked with doing.
Yeah, because it's my understanding, sorry, that we would never have asked that you put pipelines to our marae because we're already receiving water at them. But can't we take this discussion any further? Because, we've already been waiting 10 years and this is where we're at, where we were 10 years ago.
You most probably best to take it offline because I'm a bit confused. If you've got water already being provided,
I guess to help or to get some evidence behind what I'm saying, if for say Ngāti Moko use 1% of, and Western Bay's water take is 25%, and Ngāti Moko in 1 year uses 1% of that, then because my question is, what are you going to do with it? What's Western Bay going to do with their 25% of the water take? Because you haven't put pipelines anywhere.
I think you've got to read the resource consent. The resource consent is a provision to take a water take, and where it will be distributed in Western Bay. The reason it's 25 was to protect future growth, and the 75% is to protect future or current and future growth in Tauranga City.
I can definitely tell you there's future growth within our marae.
Yeah, where's the protection for Māori?
But, well, that's the problem. The resource consent's the resource consent, and we've just got to work within that, and working within it. I think that's what central government's looking at.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Two arguments is that equal to that of existing use rights. We've always had water over prior to the massive developments, and that's one point of the argument, and the other point of the argument is it actually provides essential social service to the community. That's the part of your explanation.
Sorry, Bill.
Thanks, Chair. So, on paragraph 8, Richard notes that in terms of the information gathering phase, a scope budget and a roadmap. And I'm wondering, and picking up Gary's point, whether, because we're talking about things where we don't have all the full detail, that the report comes here in the recognition that there could well be impediments in terms of how things might be implemented, the legislative arrangements, etc., and whether that's part of the roadmap, given we now have 3 waters. So we actually consider it in the context of what's happening in that space.
Yeah.
And that way we have, because Gary's obviously, he's closer to it than I am, and no doubt a number of others in the room. So it would be good to understand that more fully, and then we can decide, well, what happens and what pathway that report and information and initiative then goes on.
Yeah, should we discuss it?
Yeah, certainly, Bill, and kind of in terms of what you just said, the second phase of the project, that's obviously our intention to, as part of that piece of work, to explore the policies of both TCC and Western Bay and the legislation, and understand kind of where they fit in terms of whatever may come out of as a proposal. I guess to Mayor Webber's query about who's paying at the moment, the water reform stimulus money is paying for this piece of work. It's not being funded by either part, being funded by the government at the moment.
I suppose it's also been clear that when it does come, there might be some challenges in terms of then implementing whatever is in it. So I think everyone being clear on that, and it may not be just a simple matter of saying, well, there's an allocation of water and some other infrastructure things then happen to make that allocation occur. So I just, so people aren't thinking or going down a particular path thinking it's all sorted at this point. Once we get the information, and then we can have an informed discussion.
Okay.
You got an end date to this body of work, Richard?
Not right now. I guess the information gathering, would like to see that wrapped up sort of by March of next year. Obviously a few hui discussions to have with the 3 parties plus Tohurangi between now and then. And then after that, obviously we can bring that more defined scope in terms of the next tranche of work back to this group for consideration, approval or otherwise, whether or not it would proceed from there.
Could I just make a comment too? While I more or less support what Bill was saying, he mentioned that because we now have 3 waters, there is uncertainty about how that might all happen. I think, yes, we know we've got 3 waters, it's been mandated, we know it's coming, but we don't know how it's going to be implemented and rolled out. So that's to me where the uncertainty, you know, we have to make some provision for the discussion that then takes place after that.
Line the bullets
So, Mr. Webber, are you suggesting that everything stops?
No, we can continue doing some work, but just be mindful of 3 waters are sitting across the top, and you might get there quicker through 3 waters than you might through this.
And understanding the implications.
I just want to make sure everybody's aware these are, because the bit that I'm doing has to be completed by March of next year, so it'll most probably come out before this report comes out.
Yeah, well, in the interim, I'd suggest we maintain status quo until the information that we're talking about comes to hand, and we can move on it when it's available.
keep the powder dry.
I was happy to move receipt of the report, Chair.
Just before you maybe move a seat, or you can do that after. Dr. Morgan just has a demonstration of the Māori model, where it's been developed to now. So this is progress and life state with some real data in it. So I'll pass over to Kipper and kia ora. Thank you.
Kia ora, kia ora tātou. Whānau, maybe if you'd like to see this, it'd be a better view over there, Pia. Koe papauri takitua. Kia ora tātou. I'm just going to try and operate from here. Can everybody see this? Yes. Ka pai. How does this Māori monitoring contribute to our understanding? I think the water storage presentation that Steve gave, it provided a scientific view, which is like siloed. And I think it's siloed because most of the questions that you collectively asked were seeking a more holistic understanding of what's going on. So the Māori monitoring now using Tauranga City Council data from December 2019 through to now, and we got that last week. We've been able to load it. So I'll just show you how it works. You'd all recognise that whenua. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that Māori model logo.
So this is actual data you're using, right?
This is data Peter provided.
Sure.
Yep. So we can click on that icon and that'll update. What that's giving us is it there yet? Oh, okay. So apologies, the scale is not right for you to be able to see it. A bit larger. Okay, so what that's doing is that's giving a summary of the 4 data sets that we've been provided. Nitrates, phosphorus, turbidity and E. coli. And you can see the current recording there for each of those. And then just off screen, oops, sorry, is the actual Māori score on here for each one. And then it's averaged, and it gives plus 0.25, which is where the Māori is sitting. And the direction of the tefa is telling you where it has been previously. And so the tefa is actually pointing to the left, which means that the Māori is around normal, but it's trending in the wrong way. Ka pai? So that's quite intuitive. You can look at the actual indicators here, and this is using today's, the most recent date. You can see for nitrates, it's actually sitting over here. We go down, here's the scientific data. Excuse me. So the scientific data we can apply, for example, the National Policy Statement thresholds, and it goes on to there. And so those thresholds are interpreted in terms of the Māoriometer, and the red is, where it is. You can see the data is trending along like that, monthly averages. We can change the date to anywhere in that data set. So if I go back to my birthday, fellas can put a party on next year. That's giving us the condition on my birthday earlier this year. You can see the Māoriometer is actually not looking good at all. It's very close to -2, and it's still going the wrong way. Okay, it's just a little bit hard to drive this from my keypad. So if I go up, I can do the same thing for the phosphorus. Important to understand that. Because when you combine the two, that gives conditions for algal bloom. Other problems. Monthly average. You can see, however, I don't know why that one's being the way it is. Oh, okay. Excuse me for a sec. There's the date that's real. No date. So that's the phosphorus. Might be a quick line out. Turbidity is very good. Turbidity data you can't quite see is down here. Threshold. Note that TIF is looking good for that one. And then the last one. Just looking at the E. coli there, not the very low detection E. coli, so that's looking good as well. Now, the point of this is that's only biophysical. Iwi also have their own perceptions of the condition of the Waiari and ways of knowing. Those can also be incorporated, mahinga kai, other things like that. The discussion around water availability for the community, having to have water shortages, those things can also be fed in. So what this can do is give you that holistic representation. That's just looking at particular times, but we can also show it over time. So you can get more than just the trend indicated with the tewa direction. Kapai. Probably just close out there with the comment, the earlier presentation on water shortage talked about rainfall, groundwater recharge, but I think all of your questions were identifying that what was missing was us in between, because what we do in between is impacting different ways at a really big scale, global climate change. But it doesn't mean we can sort of say, oh, it's out of our hands, we can't do anything about it. I think Te Mana Te Wai actually requires us to be proactive and responsive to those things. And so Regional Council, I think, should, on their scale of 0, 1, 2, 3, it starts off from normal being 0, and if I put that on this modiometer, the 1, 2, 3, although the positive are coming this way, but if you look at the modiometer, there's another side to it. And so Regional Council should have some numbers over here that are saying what you're doing that's actually mitigating what's going to happen. You know, riparian planting was mentioned. All of those different things that we know could be done in a proactive way. Regional Council should be looking at the opportunity to do something with the knowledge. Yeah? And I think that's what our iwi want, to be involved in that and to be active in the Kaitiaki tanga. So, yeah, I'll answer any questions if I can get and I don't know how my tapu ga kaki.
Anyone have a question?
Oh, yeah, to support what you're saying about, I think you want to see some proactivity as well, instead of the ambulance. What can we do to keep the Māori strong before it declines?
Carlos?
I was just interested in terms of the Māori meter and where the tepa sits, is like 0 based on, like, say with the nitrate, for example, is the 0 based on just solely like that would be an example of the nitrate position? Or does it have a cultural layer that influences where 0 might sit, if that makes sense?
So it's a really good question. What we've done is we've got the council data and we've got the excuse me, the national policy statement thresholds. Iwi may not actually agree with where those thresholds are. And so that's where we would, sorry, that's where we would discuss where's the more appropriate place. Because even when those national policy statement thresholds were set nationally, the committee that sat on that were quite divided about what was what. Mike Joy, Russell Death, they were saying this is where these thresholds should be, but then you had other people with other interests who were really setting quite different levels because that suited what they wanted. And that, you know, I guess you can understand why they're doing that, but, you know, the thresholds that are relevant here, really, tangata whenua should be having a big say in that, and council too. But you're exactly right. If the thresholds are set nationally, how do we know they're actually relevant here? Yeah. So, cover.
It's a big help. Oh, got it. And keep it, I guess, just for the room, probably those are unweighted indicators as well, right? So you can apply a weighting to a variety of to different indicators. You know, if one has, like nitrates has a higher importance, then you could apply greater weight, and then it would influence the outcome, right?
We can. I'm just trying to find where my mouse is gone. Can anybody see it?
Yeah, it's right at the top.
Oh, okay, good boy. Thanks, Joel. So, it's just attempting to reconnect. That's a good point, Richard. So we can weight the threshold. So this is a test that we set up, if you like, just a dummy one. This has got everything in it. So there's the ecosystem tab, where, for instance, nitrates that we just looked at. It's still disconnected. But you've also got social indicators, economic indicators, and the local iwi hapu indicators. And then within that you can have however many you want contributing, as Richard said. And then overall, you can actually combine these indicators as sets in different proportions. So to represent a commercial activity owner, they might say, oh, we're pretty much focused on the economics, we'll do the best we can environmentally and socially and for the iwi, but at the end of the day we have to survive economically. So they might place quite a lot of emphasis on that from their worldview. Iwi conversely might say, well, our ecosystem's integrity is our integrity because you can't separate them. So we would place a lot of priority on the ecosystem and our own mauri. Because if they're all right, we'll take care of the rest of the things. We can manaki, we can look after. So what you can do is you can actually set up a bias in this part, which we can add in, and then different worldviews could just put in what their worldview is, and it'll reflect the difference. Now, it's not saying one is right and one's wrong. All it's doing is showing why some people will see something one way and some will see it another way. The thing is, when you understand why you're seeing it differently, you can actually have a more constructive conversation about what needs to change. If you're very focused on one bit, you know, you can sort of become less connected to the reasons why if there's other things going wrong that you don't care about as much. This can actually provide the way of understanding why you don't, you know, a person, I'm just a fictitious person. Conversely, they can also see why iwi and hapu are so concerned about the ecosystem. So this does that. This is unbiased with a shadow tewhatewhas, but when the bias, excuse me, okay, when the bias is applied, that's actually the experienced moding. So this is there's the 4 dimensions being combined. It's clearly putting more priority on the iwi and the ecosystem. So this might be an iwi perspective of the situation in the context. That's quite useful for the discussions. The other thing that's useful for iwi is to understand what the Māori phases of the maramataka are doing to influence our understanding, because we know there's rhythms with the maramataka that can be considered. And this one here is, I guess, where we have to pay the piper, to use that expression. This is the cumulative. Taking a long time to load. This does over time through a perspective, and it shows how much Māori is being removed from the system or how much Māori is being added into the system. And with Kaitiaki-tanga, the intention is to enhance Māori, because we know if we enhance the Māori, it will also enhance our chances of survival, because the ecosystem around us, if its Māori is flourishing, then our Māori will flourish as well. So understanding what that cumulative impact is over time is important, because we don't tend to see immediate responses to our behaviour. Global climate warming, what we're seeing now is probably what we were doing 40 years ago, because the ecosystem itself is a big sponge. Keep putting stuff in, doesn't come straight back out. Soaks it up, releases later. So kia ora tātou. That was a long answer to your question, Richard, but and we can add that into the overall. We're only adding into the real one what's real at the moment. So we need iwi data, we need counsellors with social data, we need the economic understanding of how the water supply system interacts. Then we'll have the whole picture. Unless anybody else wants to ask any other questions.
Thank you. Can I have a move in a second? The Waiari Kaitiaki.
I moved it, I've got it seconded.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
I'm ahead. 9.4, listening back.
It was just information for receipt, that was all.
Are there any questions to the project update?
Me?
Anyone?
It's got a verbal report here for Tapawica. I just wanted to let everyone know that we've got a... Aritona?
Sorry?
Carry on.
Did you get a move? Yes, please. Sorry.
I just wanted everyone to be aware we've got a Pauara here, or GM you might call her now, for Tapawica, and if you've got any comms to go through here, please. Yeah. And I can provide that email. Andy. Yeah. Double scale.
Is that all communications through the new chair?
Yes, please. It's Andy at Tapawica.
Andy at Tapawica. Are there any questions?
To see the local council on these cases.
Got a move your report? Is that the time?
Yep.
Yep. So, are you moving your report? Can I have a second for the Tapawica area committee? Manaki. that the Waiari Kaitiaki Advisory Group received the Tapawica Iwi Authority report. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against say no. Are there any discussion on late items?
We've already resolved
Yeah.
the no deal item.
Sorry. Anything else? No? What's up? What's in there again? Okay, no more good on it. Oi, Maru, tō te koe? So, tāku te tū. Thank you all for coming today. Te wau.
Ei, tūri koe.
Yeah.
Mate mā, tēnā.
I tūwhera ia.
Ai.
Nānei.
Henei tātou, we close our hui. Ke taunga manaakitanga te mea ngaro ki runga i tēnā o mātou. Ke mahe te hu māki ki, e toi te kupu, toi te oro, toi te rangi Māori, toi te reo Māori, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna.
Tēnā.
Hui e tāu.
Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.